part G, how much would the variable cost per unit have to increase by before the firm decide to shut down and not to produce in the short run? So the first concept that you need to know here is that there's a difference between short run and long run. So in the short run, firm can choose to either produce or they can choose to shut down. And in the long run, firm can choose to produce or they can choose to exit the market. And you'll see that the difference between shut down and exit the market is that for shut down means that we're still paying the fixed cost. So in the short run, the firm cannot exit the market. The firm can only shut down. The reason the firm cannot exit the market is because there are obligations that the firm has to commit to. So for example, in the short run, if the firm has a rental agreement, then the firm will need to pay that rent every month. Doesn't matter how many units they're producing, they still need to pay the rent. If the firm decides not to produce, they still have to pay the rent. So that's why in the short run, the firm cannot completely exit the market. So firm cannot exit the market in the short run because they have obligation. They have fixed costs that they need to pay. They have salary that they need to pay. You cannot just fire someone, right? So you need to give them notice. So therefore, in the short run, firm have to pay the fixed costs. So as a result, in the short run, the firm can choose to shut down. They can choose to not produce, but they cannot choose to exit the market. In the long run, it's a different story. In the long run, everything becomes variables. There are no more fixed costs because in the long run, once the rental agreement expired, you can choose to rent or you can not choose to not rent. So you have more options. So that's the difference between short run and long run. Short run, you have fixed costs, so therefore you cannot choose to exit the market. You can only choose to shut down. In the long run, everything becomes variable. All the costs become variable costs. Then therefore, as a result, then the firm can choose to completely exit the market if they're losing money. So that's the first concept that you need to know, the difference between short run and long run. So once we understand the difference between short run and long run, then the second concept that you need to understand is that in the short run, when the firm decides to shut down or not, they don't really care about the fixed cost. So when the firm is deciding to shut down or not, the fixed cost is irrelevant. The reason is because the fixed cost is a sunk cost. Sunk cost is a cost that they have incurred already. So it doesn't matter how many units that the firm need to produce, the firm will still need to pay the fixed cost. So the fixed cost is a sunk cost. They have to incur that regardless. So when the firm is deciding to shut down or not, they don't look at the fixed cost. They only look at the variable cost and the selling price. And this is where the concept of contribution margin comes into play. So contribution margin per unit is basically selling price minus variable cost. So your CM per unit equals to SP minus VC, so selling price minus variable cost. So contribution margin is what the firm looks at when they're deciding to shut down or not in the short run. Fixed cost is irrelevant. So when we calculate the contribution margin for the firm right now, they're selling at $14 per unit, and then their variable cost per unit is $2. So that means for each unit that the firm sells, their contribution margin is $12 per unit. So what that means is that for each unit that the firm sells, they're making $12 per unit. And the firm would continue to produce as long as the contribution margin is greater than or equal to 0. So as long as your contribution margin is greater than or equal to 0, as long as this is positive, that means the firm is making money, so they will continue to produce. So that is the condition that we have for the firm to produce. As long as contribution margin is greater than or equal to 0, then the firm will continue to produce. So contribution margin is basically selling price minus variable cost. So as long as selling price minus variable cost is greater than or equal to 0, then the firm will continue to produce. And then we can substitute the number into the equation. So we know that we're solving for VC. So VC is our question mark. And then selling price is $14 per unit. So we have 14 minus VC is greater than or equal to 0. And we rearrange the algebra. So we have 14 is greater than or equal to VC. So what this is saying is that as long as the variable cost is less than or equal to $14 per unit, then the firm will continue to produce because the firm is still making money for each unit that they produce. So therefore, they will continue to produce. Once we understand the condition for when the firm will produce, which is when the variable cost is less than or equal to $14, then we can find out the condition when the firm will shut down. The reason is because there are only two options. The firm either produce or they shut down. They only have two options in the short run. They can either produce or shut down. So if they produce, that means they don't shut down. If they shut down, that means they don't produce. So it's either one. They have to choose one. So the condition for produce is that variable cost is less than or equal to $14. The opposite of that is that variable cost is greater than $14. And that's what we have as the condition for when the firm will shut down. When the variable cost per unit is greater than $14, that means for each unit that the firm is producing, they will be losing money regardless of the fixed cost. Because they're selling at $14 per unit, if the variable cost is greater than the selling price of $14, that means they will lose money for each unit that they produce. So therefore, the firm will be better off to shut down. Because for each unit that they produce, they will be losing money if the variable cost is greater than $14, if the variable cost is greater than their selling price. And that's part G.